You know, some of the greatest stories in human history aren't written down in books. Nope, they're etched into tiny objects we can actually hold in our hands. Today, we're going to decode a message that's been waiting 50,000 years to be read, and it reveals a lost social network that once stretched across an entire continent. All right, let's get into it.
It all starts right here, with this one simple bead made from an ostrich eggshell. I know, it doesn't look like much, but what you're seeing is a time capsule. It's one of the oldest pieces of jewelry ever created, a tiny little breadcrumb left for us by our distant ancestors. And get this, thousands of these breadcrumbs are now leading scientists to a truly incredible discovery.
So that really is the big question, isn't it? How can something so small tell such a massive story? What can a piece of jewelry possibly tell us about how ancient people lived, how they talked to each other, and how they stayed connected across the vast, vast expanse of Africa?
Now, for decades, scientists have known from genetics that humans in Eastern and Southern Africa split apart at some point way back in the past. But the big question was always when and why. Turns out the clues to that whole mystery were hiding in plain sight the entire time.
And to find those clues, researchers went all out. They put together this massive database of over 1,500 ostrich eggshell beads. And these weren't from just one place. They came from 31 different archaeological sites, spread out over thousands of kilometers. This wasn't just digging in one spot, this was a continent-spanning detective story.
Okay, so how on earth do you read a bead? Well, to solve this mystery, you first have to understand the language they're speaking. And here's the secret, the information isn't in what they're made of, it's all about how they were made.
The key is to think of bead style as a kind of cultural fingerprint. You know the specific size of the bead or how big the hole drilled in the middle is? Those weren't random choices. They were shared traditions, almost like an ancient fashion trend that got passed from one group to another. So if two groups hundreds of miles apart are making beads in the exact same way, that's a huge clue they're in contact.
And this is a really crucial distinction to make. Genetics can tell us about biological exchange, who our ancestors were related to. But these beads, they tell a totally different story. They reveal cultural exchange, who our ancestors were talking to, who they were sharing ideas with, and who they were friends with.
So once scientists started looking at the past in this new way, they uncovered something absolutely mind-blowing. A connection so vast, it would literally rewrite the story of our earliest ancestors.
Just take a look for yourself. On the left, you've got beads from Eastern Africa. On the right, beads from Southern Africa. These places are thousands of kilometers apart. And yet, for a very specific period of time, the beads they were making, well, they looked pretty much identical. The styles were almost a perfect match.
And this wasn't just a feeling, they kind of look similar. The hard data confirmed it. This chart shows the distribution of bead styles. East is in blue, south is in yellow. Between 50,000 and 33,000 years ago, those two curves are statistically the same. That is the smoking gun. It's the unmistakable signal of one massive, connected culture. I mean, let that sink in for a second. 3,000 kilometers. This was a social network stretching farther than the entire United States is wide. It's the oldest long-distance social network we've ever found. And for over 17,000 years, people kept this incredible connection alive. But then, the signal just went dead.
Yeah, the story takes a really sharp turn here. Because just as suddenly as this vast network appears in the archaeological record, poof, it vanishes, which of course leaves us with an even bigger mystery.
This timeline really lays it all out. The network is thriving for millennia, then around 33,000 years ago, the connection just breaks. For thousands of years after that, the two regions are totally isolated. When bead making eventually picks back up in the south, the style is completely different. It's not until much, much later that any kind of new connection is slowly built again. And you can literally see the exact moment it happened right here in the data. The blue line for the east and the yellow line for the south are moving together, almost as one. And then, boom! Right around 33,000 years ago, they split and go their separate ways. The cultural connection is completely severed.
So what could cause a social network that had lasted for 17,000 years to just fall apart? The answer wasn't war, or a plague, or some kind of cultural falling out. No, the culprit was something far, far more powerful.
I mean, really think about that. What kind of force is so huge that it could physically separate people across an entire subcontinent and keep them apart for over 10,000 years?
And this is the answer: climate change. The researchers found that the collapse of the network lines up perfectly with a major climatic shift. Specifically, this change caused the massive Zambezi River area, the very region that connects East and Southern Africa, to flood uncontrollably, creating a gigantic, impassable barrier.
And the science behind it? A huge weather system called the Intertropical Convergence Zone actually shifted south. When it moved, it completely changed the rainfall patterns, essentially closing the door on the corridor that had connected these two worlds for so long.
Now this is so much more than just a fascinating piece of ancient history. This 50,000-year-old story, read from a handful of tiny beads, has a really profound lesson for us today about the deep relationship between human society and the planet we all live on.
So what have we learned? We've seen that the world's oldest jewelry tells this incredible story of human connection, of our ancestors' very first long-distance social network. We saw that it lasted for an amazing 17,000 years, but we also saw how fragile it was. It wasn't broken by conflict, it was broken by a changing climate. And that's a powerful reminder that our societies have always been deeply tied to the environment.
And that leaves us with one last, pretty urgent thought. Today we have a global social network, one that's more complex and interconnected than our ancestors could have ever imagined. So you have to ask yourself, if a shifting climate could sever their world, what might it be doing to ours?